Well, Dick, I thought this would be a great opportunity. Having just spoken to a guy you know very well, Bernard Muir, who put out this incredibly powerful, moving statement last week, the athletic director at Stanford, where you've spent most of your life in and around Stanford. And I just thought this would be a great opportunity this week to talk about a program that you have been instrumental, so involved with. Full disclosure, because of you, I've been involved on the board, EPATT. I put a link here in the description. So if anybody wants to find out more, rather than do this, they can go to the link and find out more about this. But it's really struck me over the last week, Dick, that what EPATT has done for 30 years now seems to be the kind of program that we're hearing people talk about, where if we're saying it's not words but actions, right, that communities can make a difference, right? You've seen it for 30 years.
Yeah, there's no question. East Palo Alto itself, Ted, it's really changed dramatically. Actually, our ED, executive director Dave Hagaki, his grandfather was actually a Japanese raised flower out there in East Palo Alto. I think he lived out there and raised flowers in a little farm, a little acreage he had, and I don't know if he sold them for seed or sold them in the market or whatever. But Dave has roots in East Palo Alto, and when I moved up here at Stanford and started going to Stanford in '55, it was all black in East Palo Alto. And a fellow of mine was on a tour, a local guy named Jeff Aarons, a wonderful fellow. Went out on the tour after he graduated from Stanford and did a nice job on the tour, played a couple of years, and he came back into my office one day at Stanford. He said, Coach, I said, what are you going to do now, Jeff? He says, well, that's what I came in to talk to you about. I really like to teach tennis, but I don't want to teach at a private club. There's so many kids who haven't had a chance to learn this great game and the values it teaches that I want to teach underserved kids. At that time, I was on the board of a nonprofit called the Youth Tennis Foundation, which helped provide money for instructors in different underserved areas in Northern California. Now it's became the Youth Tennis Advantage, but at that time, East Palo Alto was one of the areas they helped fund a tennis instructor for. And I would help provide an instructor for them. I'd introduce them to someone from the Stanford team or someone from the area I knew was teaching, or from Foothill Junior College where I was for part of that time, and say, well, maybe you can hire this guy. So I said, Jeff, I have just the right thing for you, I think. So I called up the recreation department and I asked I forget his name. I asked him, I said, well, have you hired anyone yet for the summer? He said, no, in fact, we're looking. And said, well, I might have someone for you again. I said, let me bring him out, and when's a good time? And so Jeff and I went out to East Palo Alto and met with him, and he was hired on the spot. And Jeff was like a Pied Piper. At that time, there were still 6 courts at the remnants of Ravenwood High School. The school was closed, it was boarded shut, but the courts were still there. And I remember when Jeff was actually teaching there for that first summer, Jeff Kemp, who was the head of HUD at the time, head urban development at the time, came out from Washington, D.C., and actually we went through the courts with him. And there were bullet casings on the courts. There were syringes on the courts. The weeds were growing up all throughout the courts, but that's all there was out there. And in fact, those courts were demolished a couple of months later. So East Palo Alto then had no courts at all. And Jeff had been a big hit that first summer. Kids loved him. He was like a Pied Piper. They just followed him around. And he gave his heart and soul in that. And so Red Fay was Undersecretary of the Navy to JFK, John Kennedy. And so Red was active on the board of the Youth Tennis Foundation and lived down in this area. And his summer home was down here in Woodside. And he said, well, Dick, let's go out and talk to the superintendent. We'll get a meeting set up. We'll go out and talk to her and see the superintendent of schools can help us with some location where we might find school land to build some courts on. So we made an appointment with Charlie Mae Knight. We went out to visit her in her superintendent's office. And Charlie Mae's a black lady, a really, really nice lady. And she looked at us and she just kind of laughed. Said, well, Mr. Fay and Dick, said, East Palo Alto is full of do-gooders, and they come out to help us, and here 1 month 2 months or for the summer and we never see them again. I don't want another do-good program in our community. And we looked at it and said, Charlie May, we're going to build 4 courts for you. And we're going to install a program for you. Our lead instructor taught here last summer. How can you lose with that? And she said, well, maybe at Chavez School, middle school at the time, we can do that. So she put me in touch with us, put us in touch with the architect for the district. We went to his places in the old Whiskey Gulch area of East Palo Alto, just as you cross 101 and where the Four Seasons Hotel is now. And went in and met with him, and he laid out some courts for us, and some friends of ours helped build a court, and we put 4 courts in. So now Jeff had a place to teach when the summer finished. So, and they tore down the courts at Old Ravenswood High School. And it was going so well that kids they had nothing to do after school. They had no place to go. There were no activities in East Palo Alto. These kids were just running the streets. And so Jeff was a Pied Piper. It was the one thing he could do. People flocked to it. He said, Coach, what do I do? I'm out of courts. So Red and I go back to Charlie May night. Charlie, he still had a lot of land in his property at Chavez. Can we put 4 more courts in? So we raised more money and put 4 adjacent courts in. Now we had 8 courts out there. And Jeff filled them again. and there was no place to put these kids. So then Jeff had the idea, this was about the 3rd year before it was called EPATT. It was about the 3rd year. Another fellow was getting involved pretty heavily, Jack Gifford, the late Jack Gifford, who was the CEO of Maxim Integrated Circuits. And we went together again to Charlie May and said, Charlie May, do you have any teachers when they get done with their classes at Chavez might let us use their classrooms for some tutoring? Jeff's proposal was that if he can have half the kids in tutoring on Monday, Wednesday, then he can have more kids on the courts on those days, and they flip-flop. Mm-hmm. And if you miss your tutoring, you can't come to tennis. So actually tennis became the carrot that drove kids into the tutoring after school. So we talked to the principal, Charlie May's suggestion, introduction, and she said, let me talk to a few of the teachers. We had 3 classrooms side by side, and we would bus some Stanford students out to East Palo Alto to do the tutoring. And there were some adults who helped out too. One of these was Liz Blum, who was at the time, or they're right around that time, they had a Northern California Tennis Association, president of it, USTA NorCal. And she would tutor each day. And it was almost all Black, the population. And the 8 courts are going like crazy. We got a couple of vans donated to us, and we would bus some Stanford kids over to tutor. And it was pretty much group tutoring, but it was really popular. And our academic head was a Stanford gal named Dee Dee Terzian, and she and Jeff worked great together. And for 10 years, this program, starting with tennis, and then for the last 7 or 8 years, academically as well, survived in East Palo Alto, was really, really going strong. The population was starting to change. There was starting to be more and more Hispanics moving in the area, and more Blacks moving out. And at about that time, after the 10th year, there was a fire at the school. They never decided whether it was arson or not, but it burned down the wing of the school that we were doing our tutoring in, and we lost our 3 classrooms. And at almost the same time, the state mandated the maximum class size be, I think, 40 students or 25 students or something like that. So these large classes needed more rooms. They had to be broken down, and the school had no more. So they brought in portable classrooms, and that they were put in a parking area, and some of the parking area they lost was converted into where the courts were. So we lost 4 of the courts. So we lost 3 classrooms and 4 courts within the year. And that was 1997 in the fall, and we just had finished part of Toby's tennis stadium at Stanford. And under the side, where we have an indoor court on the side nearest the athletic building, away from the track, And on that side, we had some unbuilt space, probably 3,000 feet, 3,500 feet. And it was a concrete floor, but no walls or anything. And so I went to my athletic director at the time. I said, do you think we could build this out and maybe bring these kids over here for a year while they have no place till we get some room to get back into East Palo Alto? He said, well, let me check. He went to the provost, I believe it was Condi at the time, and the president of the university, Don Kennedy, was big on community outreach. And in one day, they came back and said, absolutely, bring them over. So we had no heat. We had no lights in this area, cold concrete floor. We put in some electrical outlets and strung some lights and hung them from chains in the ceiling temporarily. It was against code, I'm sure, but no one really looked too closely. We put in space heaters on 25-foot extension cords, picked up some cheap tables and brought them over, and some cheap chairs, and that's where we started our tutoring. But the interesting thing was, Ted, the kids thrived at Stanford. And to get them out of the community that they'd been cloistered in, basically segregated into, to get them out of the community into another environment, especially one that was just so enticing as Stanford, was a tremendous thing. And we kind of looked at each other and said, wow, maybe we should see if we could stay here. And we went back and said, university, and said, yeah. And Jeff said, I really think we should be in East Palo Alto, and we should be. It's an East Palo Alto program, and I can reach more kids there because we're limited at Stanford. And we're limited in court time at Stanford. It gets dark at 5 o'clock. The kids have to stop then because we can't get on the court till 5 when the team gets off. In the wintertime, 2 months a year, it's dark at 5, there's no tennis then. We were stuck. And so
this is where the great Gould takes over.
Well, Jeff gave his life to this, Ted.
Yes,
He was every second, every ounce of his being was put into this thing at a very, very nominal salary. And his coach and his tutoring head, Didi. And so when we decided to stay, Jeff said, I'd rather get back in the community at some point, and doesn't look like we're going to right now, although this is a great opportunity. So Dave Hagaki, who was working with Jeff at the time, said, well, I'll take over if you'd like. And we got permission from the athletic department and the university to build out that area. Mm-hmm. So we had a meeting at the sports cafe, invited a certain number of people, and we raised just over $1 million in that 2-hour meeting, describing what we were going to do. It was amazing. Our lead gift was $400,000 from Victor Ritchie's in honor of his deceased wife. Victor was the headmaster at Pinewood School. And we had at Pinewood, kids were getting out of East Palo Alto school system at some point and getting into the other areas. And they would give some scholarships. We helped fund as well we had 7 or 8 EPATT kids at Pinewood. Mm-hmm. And he saw the transition, he saw what this education was really doing for them, and that they had support back at Stanford through EPATT for what they were doing at Pinewood. So he was, in his wife's name, give us $400,000, a little over $1 million we raised that night. Someone else came in with 200. There were a lot of $50,000 gifts, and we walked out the door within the next week, we had $1 million. So then we went back and said, well, we got costing to build it out. It was about $500,000. We did that. Then we took the other $500,000, used to light the tennis courts for the first time, the 11 courts. And we had money left over, and we let the courts across the streets. And now the kids, when darkness came, when the team got off the court, they had a place to play at dark. It also helped the program because when we had matched around late or something with the team, we could finish them up in the lights. We didn't have that before. It was a win-win. And the program continued to thrive. The population of the students changed a little bit now. Now it's mostly Hispanic. But I remember one night, went over there with Jack, there was a meeting we were trying to get something else done to promote the program when it was still in East Palo Alto. It was the night of Watch Riots. And we go over there, and I remember calling several times during the day, night after the Watch Riots, first night of the Watch Riots, and asking the police department, is it safe to come? And you think, well, I said, I wouldn't recommend it, but no one can prevent you from coming. So far, it's been a quiet day. So we go over there at 7 o'clock at night and have our meeting with the city council or whomever it was, and it was successful. We came back, but that was a little bit of the history of it all.
Yeah.
And
So I want to make sure we get to some other college stuff, but the bullet points of what you just talked about, Dick. So you're saying, this is Jeff Aarons really took hold of this, ran with it. You're in East Palo Alto, and eventually you come over to Stanford, and it's Don Kennedy, who was the president then, sadly just passed away, but Condoleezza Rice is the other name you referenced, who was the provost, that opened the door. And now you can bring, which has gone on for 23 years, if I'm right, 97 to present,
yeah.
where
Well,
young kids, and it spans it's kindergarten through pretty much through high school, right?
yes, and a lot of kids are in. Most kids are in. Many kids, they start young. They're in the program for 6 years.
Yeah.
You can't. The kids now that just started as first graders or whatever, so you can't count. The mean goes down when you add them in there, but it's not unusual. I'd say most kids probably have a lifespan in the program for 6 years. Their parents cry to get them in there. The problem is we don't have enough space there, and to do what we really can do and should be doing, and that's always bothered me. And we don't really have good court time. We don't get on the court so later. They only have an hour on the court. We divide them into a younger group on the court while the older kids are in the classroom. Then we flip them. Parents bring in dinner, so the older kids have dinner while they're there. But there are a lot of reasons for going back into the community, and we've been trying to figure out a way to do it. It's not easy because the community is still very unstable in many ways. Different school personnel a lot of changes there, a lot of changes within the city. And so to try to make a concrete plan on how to do this, what school to work at, it's hard. It's not as easy as it sounds, but thankfully Stanford has given us enough time to be able to make the transition, and our staff is right on it, and some good things are about ready to happen.
And so, Dick, the education element, and that's what, when you first introduced this thing to my awareness, that's what it was that you're taking kids that are underserved, giving them the tutoring, largely done by Stanford students. Many of these young men and women go to college, and so oftentimes, as I've learned, first one, right, in their family to go to college. I have a picture, I think Dave Higaki found it for me. Vita Vea, who's now playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFL, was, I think, a 6 or 7 year EPATT student.
As were his sisters and brothers.
I believe the first in his family to go to college, and he has, with the picture I have, is him holding a tennis racket in 5th grade. Now, he's a 320-pound nose tackle, so he picked the right sport.
You called that on TV. I heard you say that on TV. You're broadcasting that game with Stanford and Washington.
Yeah, but it's those are the kind of things that I'm saying that in this current climate, as of today, that we're living in. What a phenomenal achievement to have watched grow from a seed as you did, to watch now a couple of thousand young people come through and receive extra education from Stanford students, right? Largely, which is phenomenal, that propel them to go where they may not have gone otherwise, to go to college.
Well, people forget that 30 years ago, East Palo Alto was the homicide capital of the world per capita, mostly drugs, a tremendous drug problem. And it was featured on our program was featured actually on the primetime news on CNN and on Dan Rather's nightly news, special features for 2 or 3 minutes on the program. They came out, sent a crew out, filmed it, interviewed Jeff, interviewed some of the kids, some of the parents. It was fascinating. And it was the one ray of hope in the community, the one thing that kids could do constructively. And so I'm really proud of how the program's evolved, and the community, I think, really relates to it. They understand what's happened. They understand it can make a difference. We have all these terrible things we're facing today, and it's programs like this, the grassroots, that make the difference. To see the kid we have in that program, not only do we have almost 100% of kids go to college, it's 97 or 99%, but I think 97% of those graduate from college, which is another remarkable statistic. They stay with it, and they're prepared enough to be able to do that. And that's a tremendous thing. That's the kind of thing that's going to make a change in this world, I think, more than anything.
And the other brilliant part is, I referenced the tutoring, and a lot of that coming from students, but a full-time staff that you've watched. You mentioned Executive Director Dave Higaki, but his full-time staff, the full-time staff, is extraordinary.
Well, there are two of them were African-American students at Stanford, the 2 academic heads. Keisha and Christina, and they've been with they and Dave. They've all three of them have been with the program more than 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
We hired Keisha out of the Haas Public Service Center. That's where our first offices were. We had a little office at Haas. They gave us space over there. So it's been a really nice love affair with Stanford and East Palo Alto. It's been great for the students at Stanford. A lot of them have gone into education because of their experiences as tutors for these kids. It's been a win-win for everybody, and we've been very blessed that when we really needed it, Stanford stepped up and let us in, and now we're anxious to get back to the community and see what difference we can make there. Redefine the program a little bit, redesign it some, and make it stronger yet, serve more kids.
Well, I think that's great. And that's one reason, again, to get you on the Zoom here and talk about this, because it's so important after what we've all been confronted with in the last 2 weeks to learn about the programs like EPATT. And my gosh, I wish there were, and there are others I know, but I wish there were 10 million. I think we all do. 10 million EPATTs around.
What do you think about it, Ted? You do the tennis. There's a Malavea Washington Foundation. Malavea was a great African-American player. The Zena Garrison Foundation, they both have the same kind of programs, and they're two of the best ones in the country. And EPATT's won several really high impact national awards. It's probably the most respected tennis tutoring program in the country, and it's also by the Stanford community. It was Stanford's first ever recipient of a community service award that Stanford awards each year. And 10 years later, about 3 or 4 years ago, they were named the first and only, to this date, legacy award winner by the Stanford Community Service Award. So the Stanford community has been very proud of it and supportive of it also, which has really been wonderful.
All right, let me pivot here. When we come out of this and get into whatever the next phase of normal is going to be, Dick, college athletics. Wow, I mean, we've all talked, all of us who are involved in my livelihood, your livelihood. We talk about this. We wonder where it's going. There's so much change that was in the mill prior to Corona, name, image, likeness. Now the loss of revenue, bluntly, has put so much more in danger. Just give me a beginning here, where the big picture of college athletics, having been around it for a long time. I won't say how long.
I've said in several of the talks I've given for the last 5 years, I said there's a big elephant in the room. The biggest one, of course, is the fact I think that it's our revenue. It's a war out there. Who can build the best facility? Who can do this? It's a business. It's a big business in a nonprofit setting, and I don't know how we get away with that. It's also antitrust in many ways, with the name Likeless trying to control that. Who's going to do that and keep everything on the straight and narrow? I've always said that there was an elephant in the room, and that was TV. And this has gotten out of hand, frankly, because of, and it is out of hand because of the fact that the money that is being put in athletics is generated mostly from television. And that's okay, but it's really allowed for these facility wars. You can build the biggest and the best, and a lot of things that are not really relevant to education per se. And I've always said, what would happen if we had a depression or something like that that caused the advertising? When you sign a contract with the conference for television, you're guaranteed as a conference so much money over a set period of time, 10 years, 12 years. Most of these, I think all of them, Ted, probably are 10 years at least, aren't they?
They're longer than ever, yes.
And if I know that I'm going to have X amount of money over the next 10 years, I'm going to take out a loan and start building right now. I'm going to spend that money right now because I know it's coming in over a 10-year period. I'm using my collateral to take out a loan to start building. So then what happens if something happens economically and the advertisers decide they can't afford what they're paying and they have to pull out? And TV is left without no income and they can't fulfill their promises and their contracts. The schools are leading a very, very marginalized, very, very tenuous existence. Mm-hmm. And I always thought it might be an economic problem, a big, serious depression. but we found out it's much more than that. And the COVID thing has been amazing. When March Madness got canceled, the NCAA could not distribute $600 million they normally distribute to the schools. They don't make money on the NCAA doesn't make money on the football. That's all the conferences, and it goes straight to the conferences. But it's already impacted us, and in terms of finances, sports are being dropped. My sport of tennis is certainly always a target, and not just Division I. We're talking 2 and 3. The NCAA has some really big challenges right now, and I think that the name and likeness thing is one, and it's going to be. I don't like the state of college athletics right now. It's a big business, Ted. It's not meant to be a big business, and I could not, as a university president, stand up to it. I could not say, "Hey, we're doing something way above and beyond what we're expected to do and should be doing as an advocate of a college education." I'd lose my job before I finish the sentence. It's too big that even a consortium of college presidents could do this. Mm-hmm. It takes something like we're going through now to make something like this, to bring it maybe into perspective and make people question it some.
It's fascinating, Dick, what you just said, because so my alma mater, which plays football with some significance, in the last 3 to 5 years, when these topics have been bounced around, and subject of paying players, just umbrella term, whatever method is finally decided upon, is broached. The president of my alma mater, who was actually, I lived 2 doors from him my freshman year, Father John Jenkins, said Notre Dame won't participate. We just won't participate. And of course, 68 million alums, only about 100,000 of them actually went to the school. The rest of them just like Notre Dame, all have heart palpitations when wait a minute, we're not going to participate. But it's a fascinating statement, because I think there's zero chance that would ever take place. But the principle on which Father Jenkins is trying to stand is what you just said.
And this may put things more in perspective, which would be good, because we're not going to be able to stand on legal terms or very long, I don't think, with the stance we've taken in college athletics. We are a big business, face it, in a nonprofit organization, within a nonprofit organization. Yeah. I don't know how long we can justify that. Well, the NFL is nonprofit too, isn't it? It might be through the foundation, or the foundation, of course, is. But
so when, I guess here's the couple of things. First of all, you made a point, Dick, that I think a lot of people still don't understand, which is that the NCAA, which is the schools themselves, and encompasses all divisions of schools, not just the 50 power, 60 power schools. They do orchestrate all the money from March Madness. They orchestrate none of the money from football. The college football playoff is an independent entity, and the conferences, and that to me is what's fascinating. So my belief is that the top conferences, I mean, it's an overwhelming percentage of their revenue comes from football. So if football's impacted coming up in the fall, it doesn't impact, like Stanford's not going to close, right? Stanford University's not going to close, but Stanford athletics would be severely impacted.
I think a lot of schools are going to have a hard time. I mean, the budgets are being trimmed. There have been freezes on it. When the basketball and football coach say their salaries may be cut 10% or 20%, and they're making $8 million a year, I don't feel too sorry for them. Yeah. I mean, in 40 out of 50 states, either the football, mostly football, but the basketball coach is the highest paid public official in the state, and so much more than the university president's receiving. Something's wrong, Ted. This is not right. It symbolizes how big the business has gotten, how out of hand it is. And when a football coach is making more than a Nobel Prize professor, then something's wrong.
Yeah. And well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, Dick, that's one thing I think will come out of this pandemic is that the war, as you said, there's been an arms war going on for a long, long time that I've been around it as well. And it's morphed from various things, facilities, coaches' salaries. Now it's assistant coach salaries that in football, in another part of the country, is seven figures for assistant coaches, coordinators.
Several of the coaches, yeah, on the staff.
Crazy.
Yes.
And that model to me is not sustainable. I think coming out of pandemic, because what I'm going to guess, and this hits close to home for you, is that a lot of universities are going to have to make decisions. You have to field a certain number of sports. Another fact I think people don't really understand is, for example, I heard the great Bill Walsh even suggest this once when I was around Stanford, late in Bill's life when he was on campus. In the arms race discussion, he suggested at one point maybe Stanford just won't play Pac-10 football. And well, you can't do that and be in the Pac-10. If you don't play football, you're out of the Pac-10 for everything. So it leaves all of your sports, having to go find another place to play. There's three sports you have to have. You have to play football, men's basketball, and women's basketball, right? Those are the three sports you must play to be in the Pac-12. The NCAA minimum, you probably know that. I don't know the number, but there is a minimum, right?
No, it is. And the nice thing is about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the NCAA, there was pressure on the NCAA to decrease the minimum number of sports you had to have. It's there are so many women's sports, so many men's sports. It's maybe a total of 15 or 17, something like that, split up between the two genders. But the NCAA stood by it, and they said, no, we're going to keep that minimum. But no, Stanford has 36 sports, 37 sports. So Stanford would have the option then of dropping them. Little things like before the NIL thing came about, name, image, likeness thing came up and is going to affect in another year. Before that came up, they started paying above and beyond room, board, tuition, fees, and books. They started paying transportation to and from home once or twice. The athletes now are getting more and more things. Maybe started about 5 years ago. That's been expensive. Serious scholarship now is not just room, board, tuition. When I was in college, almost every football player hashed for his room and board. He did get tuition, but he had to hash for his wait on tables for his room and board. Well, he hashed for his meals. Everybody. Jackie Douglas, John Brody, they all worked in the dormitory for their meals. There were no full scholarships. They then worked in a corporation yard for extra spending for their
spending money,
other monies. Yeah. It was very, very different. And there's a great book out now it's called The March Toward Madness. It's brand new. I would really encourage a fan of college athletics to read it. It's written by John LeBar, who was a tennis coach at Duke. I didn't know him when I first started for about the time I first started, for about 10 or 12 years. And Alan Paul. And I just got it online, and it was a fascinating read. They said the words, talking about hypocrisy of the name student, quote, athlete. It's more, and they're from Duke, and it's more, the term should be scholar athlete. It's a step higher than being, quote, a student athlete. And I thought it was nice. They had a lot of premise in that book I thought were pretty good. I would urge, it's a good read.
Okay. Well, do you think, Dick, there's a possibility that coming out of this, for example, we have men's and women's tennis, that becomes one?
I've often felt that before a school dropped tennis, that they should look toward combining the programs. If you had a world team tennis format and you had maybe 6 guys in a team instead of 12 and 6 gals in a team, your matches they're really fun to watch. It's a little less than a set. And instead of playing 1 men's singles, 1 women's singles, 1 men's doubles, 1 women's doubles, 1 mixed doubles, maybe you play 2 men's singles and a couple men's doubles and a couple of mixed doubles. People love it. And you get done in 2.5 hours. You see a lot of different styles of play. They're quick matches. The atmosphere is great. I've always felt before you drop tennis, either a men's or a women's program. You can combine them. You cut your coaches in half, and that's blasphemy for me to say that because I am a coach.
Yeah.
But you cut your coaching costs in half. You cut your equipment costs, your support staff in half that you need to service the team, and you still keep your tennis program. And I think that is a way for some of these schools, especially in other divisions, that even Division One, I would rather see that than have the program drop completely.
See that, and that's the point, right? If it sustains college tennis and continues to offer, as you said, the opportunity for six men, six women to play, the what you just outlined, I've never heard you say that before. When Larry Scott became the commissioner of the Pac-12, and once he aligned the Pac-12 network to go on the air in 2012, that was one of the first things Larry, who came out of tennis, obviously suggested, was a team tennis format for television to make college tennis television friendly. And it didn't get any traction within the college tennis community.
No, because you're still trying to get the guy who's going to become number in the top 10 in the world, and those days are past, and that's not going to happen now very often.
Right.
We haven't had an American in the top 10 for 20 years almost.
No, that was right. And to me, but the engine that's driving, you said this 10 minutes ago, the engine that's driving is television. To get college tennis, as I've participated in it, it is in its current structure, it's not television friendly. The team tennis format is.
It is, and I think that's right. And fan friendly for anybody.
Yeah,
you see a lot of variety. I think it's if you rather than lose the program, I would do that. You're going to see a lot of changes, though, Ted. I think things like in all sports, maybe not football or basketball quite so much, but remember we used to have a Southern Division and Northern Division in the Pac-8, and the only time we met was for the conference tournament. So instead of playing Washington up there and Arizona out there, I can see where you play more regionally. I think Stanford's imposed at least for non-conference matches, a 400-mile travel radius now on most sports. I think there are going to be a lot of changes. It'll be much more geographic. Some conferences are being realigned to make them more geographically friendly. So you cut out travel expenses. I cut them way down. Yeah. And I just think, I look at basketball, speaking of sports, student athlete, Thursday night games, Friday night games, Saturday night games, Sunday afternoon games, Saturday games, football now, playing Thursday night, things like going to the hotel the night before the game. So you get there Wednesday night, things are out of kilter, Ted. Something's going to give. I mean, someone somewhere is going to say, this ain't right.
And maybe the point to wrap, Dick, is that's the thing that I'm worried about during the last 3 months when we've all had plenty of time to think. But one of the great parts, it's what makes the Pac-12 so great, is the breadth of sports, the number of sports that so many of the conference schools field, and the excellence that we have across the board in this conference from those athletes. And that's what I would hate to see, that fall victim to everything we're talking about, to worship at the altar of football and a little bit to men's basketball, that Stanford can no longer field 36. Now Stanford's clearly at the extreme end. And then, there are schools at the other end that are fielding pretty much the minimum.
I didn't take Stanford for granted, and I didn't take tennis at Stanford. I ran scared the whole time I was there, and I was determined I was not going to leave Stanford as director of tennis until our entire men's program was endowed. My position as director of tennis, our head coaching position, the Toby family director of tennis, Paul Goldstein, our assistant coach, Martha and Jim Poppy, assistant coach, Brandon Coop, all of our budgets, or all of our scholarships, and enough money left over from those scholarships that it covers all of our operating expenses at the level we're allowed to operate on. And with an endowment for maintenance facilities, it's taking in earning about $100,000 expendable money a year. And I'm really, really proud of that, because I left that program with it completely endowed, and it can't be taken away, even at the level we're at now, technically.
All right, last thing. There's a book in the works. How many champions that you coached at Stanford And this is one of the things I so admire about Dick Gould. For any of you that don't know Dick Gould, is Dick Gould is putting out a book, and he's having the guys are all writing it for you, right? How do you pull that one off?
No, it's really fun. I've been thinking about it. Jack Gifford, my friend who started EPATT with myself, really, and Red Fay and Jeff. Jack asked me one day. He went to UCLA. He's in their Hall of Fame in baseball down there, and a great really competitive guy. And he's really interested in management. Of course, he was a CEO of started several Silicon Valley companies. One of them, the biggest one, was of course Maxim Integrated Circuits. But he asked me if we'd win about 10 or 12 champions. He said, "Dick, how do you win these? What do you do to win these things?" I said, "Jack, I get the best players." I mean, the players always make the coach. You know that. And he looked at it, he says, "No, a lot of guys have good players." And how really do you do it? I couldn't answer him. And then I had the head coach at Palo the year I retired asked me, he said, "Dick, how many times that you were in the NCAA finals did you win the tournament?" And in the final match of the year. And I had no idea. So I looked it up, and it was something like all but two. And the two we lost were 4-3 at Notre Dame to USC and 5-4 to UCLA at Georgia. One year. We had great chances to win both those matches, but the only two times we got there that we lost. I'm starting to think, wait a minute, how did this happen? And I could not explain it to myself. And so I thought, wait a minute. And I checked, and I have 200 guys. I've been in contact with all of them actually since graduation pretty regularly. And I have 200 guys still alive who played for me. In the first few years, we had a junior varsity team. So that made the older guys a little top heavy. But I made up a list of 20 questions. How do we deal with egos? Did you feel relevant? Well, of course, if you're not a starter, that's a big challenge for a coach. Did you feel relevant? Do we have a culture? How important is trust? Your teammates, of your coach, and vice versa. And these kinds of questions. They weren't yes or no questions, true, false questions. You had to write an essay to answer them. And I had 162 guys answer. And it took a good 2 hours to do it if you answered all of them. Most of the kids took at least that much time. Some of them, I'm sure, took 4 hours. And so then I had to get all these questions, and I took every quote for all 20 of these questions. Some were 2 pages long, some were 1 paragraph. Put the kid's name on it, his year, and whether he was a starter or not, because it could influence your answer. And or whether you were a world champion, number 1 in the world, or NCAA champion, or whatever. So you could read his answer in context of how good the guy was. And then I arranged them all chronologically. And then from that, I formed chapters. And I finally finished all I can possibly do. I can't do anymore. I've done what I can do. And it's fascinating. I love the process. 2 years ago, I sent my first letters out, appeals out for these guys to answer these questions. And so now one of my former players is back in North Carolina now. This guy, Tim Noonan, was in my class of like 75 or 74. We're just getting started. And one of my earlier teams, and he's written about 40 books, and he's got a couple of books he's finishing right now, and he's going to take it on, I think. So
great. Did Bob and Mike Bryan send in separate answers?
Yeah, they did, and then they were of course.
You're the only one that could pull that off too.
No, and they really spent a lot of time on this. Really,
great,
really did. Anyways, it's going to be fun. It'll be out six months to a year, and I think it's going to be a good read.
You have a title yet? Title?
I kind of have. I don't want to be a book on Stanford tennis. I think it's history of Stanford tennis. I think it's more a leadership management book. It's a book for other coaches of all sports. And it's not going to be a Jack Welch CEO manager. It's going to be a mid-level manager, a guy who runs the marketing department at Stanford with 50 people. Yeah. And his wannabe managers who are working for him, who want to be athletic directors later on. I think the audience is, without making it too broad, I think it's a big latent audience there. And I think it's going to be a really good read. And they tell the kids don't pull any punches. They talk about the day that so-and-so flipped me off and how I reacted, and I talk about when did you see Coach the Maddest, and
Jack has never told me that story.
They're all, which one? Many of those. It's almost every day.
Lessons from a Hall of Fame coach. Dick, thank you.
I guess the